France. December 1944. The wind tore the blizzard to pieces, snow flying sideways like bullets. My GMC groaned under the storm, every gear grinding, every rivet trembling. I could barely feel the steering wheel, the rubber was frozen hard as stone, and my gloves were slick with frost. In the back, 60 drums of high-octane fuel clanked in rhythm with the road, the kind that kept Shermans breathing, the kind that burned brighter than whiskey if you so much as looked at it wrong. The snow was too thick for landmarks. The map on the seat beside me was a useless sheet of ink and lies. The radio had gone dead 2 hours ago, nothing but static and the ghost of a voice I couldn't place. Ahead of me, the road split into 3 unmarked paths. Behind me, there was only darkness and wind. The compass needle spun lazy circles, like it had given up too. I looked at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. Enough to freeze in, not enough to find home. Then, through the whiteout, a faint orange flicker. Firelight, maybe. Or a trap. I muttered into the cab's silence, my breath turning to vapor on the glass. Hell, where am I? The storm didn't answer. Just the engine's pulse, slow and tired, and that one quiet thought that hung in the frozen air. How did I end up here? Northeast France, Ardennes region, December 17, 1944. They said the offensive wouldn't reach this far north. They said the front was stable. But paper lies easier than men do. By the time I left the depot that morning, the sky was already the color of iron. The snow came sideways, carried by a wind sharp enough to slice the breath out of your lungs. We were supposed to be the supply line, the veins feeding the armor that kept the whole war machine alive. But that morning, every vein was clotted. Orders came down through channels that no longer existed. No solo movement after dark. No unsupervised fuel transport. Maintain radio silence. All of it made sense from an office, warm, well-lit, safe. But the front wasn't made of ink and orders. It was mud, frost, and engines that died in the night because some captain in the rear was afraid of losing another truck on paper. We were losing them anyway. Bridges were gone. Mines littered the roads. Snow buried the markers until every turn looked the same. There were men out there, tank crews, engineers, mechanics, who hadn't seen fuel in 3 days. I'd heard one report that a whole platoon near Saint-Brison had drained the gasoline from jeeps just to keep their stoves burning through the night. And yet the supply sheets back at headquarters were perfect. Routes secured. Deliveries confirmed. Casualties minimal. I used to believe in the system. I thought there was logic in the chain, one hand knowing what the other did. But by December, the chain had frozen solid, every link brittle and cracking. The men who made the rules weren't here to see them break. That's what I kept thinking as I drove, that somewhere behind me, some clerk was checking a box marked, fuel delivered. He'd never feel the weight of a half-ton drum shifting on a curve, never smell gasoline mixing with snow, never hear the whisper of metal expanding in the cold. They told us to trust the process. But the process didn't have to survive artillery fire or find its way through a whiteout with a dead compass. The Ardennes weren't a battlefield anymore, they were a maze of abandoned roads and half-buried corpses. The Germans were pushing hard, a last, desperate counterstrike. We didn't know it by name then, not yet. Later they'd call it the Battle of the Bulge. But to me, that night, it was just a storm full of moving ghosts. Somewhere east, near the Meuse, a new offensive was tearing holes through the American line. Entire battalions were falling back in confusion, stumbling through the woods without direction. I'd passed 2 stragglers earlier that afternoon, frostbitten infantrymen who couldn't tell me which division they belonged to. They were walking west, toward what they hoped was safety. One of them carried his rifle upside down. It didn't matter. Nothing looked right anymore. Road signs twisted by shellfire pointed in circles. Convoys vanished into fog and never returned. We were all guessing our way through a map that no longer matched the world. Command kept calling for discipline, for patience, for order. But there's a limit to how far obedience can see through snow. The rule was simple: no solo movement. But what do you call a convoy when every other truck burns behind you? Somewhere out there, tanks waited in silence, engines cold, crews praying for the sound of engines that would never come. You could almost feel them through the ground, heavy and still, like sleeping giants waiting for blood. Fuel wasn't just supply, it was life. Every drop meant a tank could move, a generator could hum, a man could warm his hands for 5 more minutes. Lose the fuel, and the whole front turned to stone. That's what command never understood. You can't fight a war with rules drawn in ink when the snow itself erases the roads. So I drove. Against orders. Against logic. Because somewhere ahead, there were machines waiting for me, cold, silent, and dying. And behind me, the wind carried the sound of engines that had already stopped. They would write later that the system held, that the chain of supply remained unbroken. But that was never true. It wasn't the system that kept the front alive, it was the cracks in it. Men like me, driving blind through blizzards, breaking every rule because we had no other choice. That's how it always was out here. The rules froze first. The rest of us just tried to keep moving before we did too. Before the uniforms, before the maps that lied, there was a small garage outside Toledo, Ohio. Corrugated tin roof. Dirt floor. A wood-burning stove that smoked more than it heated. My name was painted on a board above the door, W. Hayes Automotive Repair. I wasn't much of a soldier then. I was a listener. I listened to engines the way some men listen to music. Every knock, every hesitation between spark and fuel, meant something. My father used to say a machine only breaks when you stop hearing it. I never stopped listening. On slow evenings, I'd sit with the hood of a customer's truck open, just staring at the carburetor, waiting for it to tell me what it needed. A misfire at idle meant lean mixture. A cough on acceleration, choke too tight. I could fix a Zenith carburetor with a pocket knife and a prayer. Across from the workbench, nailed crooked to the wall, hung a sign I made from scrap wood. If it won't move, make it think, not break. Mary said that sounded like something a preacher would say, but she liked it anyway. She was a nurse at Mercy Hospital when we met, gentle hands, steady eyes, always smelling faintly of antiseptic and lilac. She wrote me every week once I shipped out. Her letters always ended the same way. Come back safe. Machines can be fixed. People can't. I kept that letter in my breast pocket. Even now, folded soft from sweat and frost, it sits near my heart like a small, stubborn truth. When the war began, I didn't rush to enlist. I wasn't built for uniforms or salutes. But when the draft board called, I didn't argue. The country needed mechanics, men who could keep trucks running when manuals failed. I figured turning wrenches in an army motor pool wasn't so different from home. It was, completely. They taught us procedures, checklists, torque charts measured to decimals. Useful things, sure, but war doesn't read manuals. Out in the field, bolts froze, filters clogged with mud, bearings cracked from cold. Half our spares came in the wrong sizes. You learned to improvise fast or walk home. My first sergeant hated that I kept tools in my pockets. Said it made me look unprofessional. I told him the enemy didn't care how neat I looked. What mattered was whether the truck started when I turned the key. They shipped me to England in late '43, part of the Quartermaster Corps. Convoys, depots, refueling points, all logistics. No glamour, just grind. We fed the army that fed the war. Every gallon, every bolt, every breath of exhaust carried the same equation: if the truck stopped, everything stopped. The officers called us support. We called ourselves the difference between moving and dying. I wasn't brave. I wasn't one of those men who wanted medals or stories. I just liked things that worked. Engines, tools, maybe people, when you could keep them running. But the longer I stayed, the more I noticed the distance between those who fixed the machines and those who gave the orders to use them. The men behind desks thought in straight lines. War moves in circles, clogged, cold, unpredictable. By late 44, I could hear the strain in every motor that passed through my bay. The winter had teeth. Fuel thickened like syrup. We ran heaters under engines to thaw the oil before dawn. Some nights, the air froze our breath onto the dipsticks. I learned to judge temperature by how long it took the steel wrench to stick to my glove. And through it all, Mary's letter stayed with me, edges frayed, pencil fading. I'd take it out during breaks, read it by flashlight, and remind myself there was still a world not made of ration forms and snow. When they reassigned me to convoy driving, I didn't argue. It meant motion. It meant noise. Better to freeze behind a wheel than rot behind a desk. I was 29, old enough to know fear but young enough to think I could outdrive it. Some men fought their wars with rifles. Mine came with a gearbox and a fuel gauge. Every mission was arithmetic, distance versus gallons, time versus light. If one number failed, everything ended. That winter, we started losing trucks. Not to ambushes, to confusion. Wrong turns, wrong coordinates, bridges blown hours before we arrived. Headquarters kept insisting everything was fine. Supply chain intact. Routes secure. But I'd seen maps change overnight. I'd watched drivers vanish into fog that smelled of cordite and come back as names on a clipboard. I began to suspect the truth every mechanic learns eventually. Sometimes the people writing the instructions have never held a wrench. Before the war, I believed that rules kept things running. After a year in uniform, I knew better. What keeps the engine alive isn't the manual, it's the man who knows when to ignore it. That was who I was before the snow, before the night the compass died and the road split 3 ways. A mechanic. A husband. A man who trusted his hands more than his orders. And maybe that's why, when the storm came and the map turned blank, I didn't stop. I just listened, the way I always had, to the sound of the engine, whispering what it needed to survive. They briefed us in a canvas tent that snapped like a flag in the wind. A potbelly stove ticked and hissed, the heat never reached our boots. A lieutenant traced routes with a pencil, thin veins spidering across the Ardennes, and spoke as if the snow would obey him. Primary, Route C, alternate, Route F, markers intact. He didn't look up when I asked if anyone had seen those roads since the storm. Outside, the convoy idled, exhaust drifting low and white. I walked the line the way I always did, gloves on the drums, ear to the engines. Number 3 coughed on throttle. Number 5's timing was late by a hair. I set a wrench to the distributor and nudged the world back into alignment. When I came to the last truck, an older GMC with a tired Carter carb, I found the filter housing cracked clean across. The requisition cage had no spares. The sergeant shrugged like weather. Drive it anyway. I didn't. I tore a strip from a field bandage, folded it twice, and wrapped the fracture, sealing it with shellac scrounged from a radio repair kit. Not by the book. Not in any manual. But the leak stopped weeping, the pressure gauge steadied, and the engine settled into a working heartbeat. That was the first contradiction. Orders said move, reality said fix. We rolled before dusk. Route markers were half-buried stumps, their arrows twisted by blast. The map on my knee insisted on a bridge that no longer existed. At the river we found black water and 2 stone abutments like broken teeth. The lieutenant wanted to turn the column around, report the loss, wait for clearance. I could hear tank somewhere east, cold, patient, running out of everything. The wind slid down the cut and lifted the hair at my neck. We would not get another chance before dark. I scouted upstream with a flashlight cupped in my palm. 50 yards north, the remains of a logging ford, timbers iced over, current slow. I walked it, boots skidding, measuring weight in my head, axles, tire spread, drum load, margin. It would hold if we bled speed and kept the throttle steady. The lieutenant said we were not authorized to deviate. The sergeant stared at the water and pretended not to hear. I put the first truck across myself. Low gear, no brakes, wheels speaking through the wheel like a warning. The timbers groaned but did not fail. One by one, the others followed, each driver white-faced and silent. On the far bank, the lieutenant told me quietly to forget what we had done. On paper, the bridge was there. He said it the way a man closes a door. That was the second contradiction. The report would be true where the road was false. Past midnight, we hit a crossroads that didn't match the grid. The signs were gone, only bullet-bitten posts left like broomsticks in the drift. The compass stuttered and swung uselessly. I asked the sergeant which way, left into trees, right into open fields. He jabbed a finger toward the empty. Right. That's what the overlay says. I had seen an overlay lie before. I had also seen a half-track sink to its roof in a winter meadow that looked like road from a distance. I stepped down, knelt, and scooped snow with my glove. Underneath, brittle grass, then the smell, faint, sweet, unmistakable, of diesel soaked into churned soil. Tracks heavy, recent. The faint gleam of a sloughed panzer shoe, half frozen in the ruts. Left, I said. Traffic turned left. The sergeant told me I was out of line. I told him the ground was the only map that mattered. He hesitated 2 breaths too long, then waved the column left like it had been his idea from the start. The road bent through pines, the wind thick with resin and cordite. 10 minutes later we found a burned-out jeep with our division marking, its hood still warm under the snow. Third contradiction, authority pointed one way, evidence pointed another. By then I knew the people writing the orders hadn't smelled diesel freeze in the line. They hadn't cut a length of captured German plug wire to resurrect a U.S. ignition, or warmed a crankcase with a pot of stolen coffee because the fuel truck was late. They counted gallons in ledgers, I counted them by drum rings and slosh. To them, we were tonnage. To us, we were breath. I broke more rules after that, small ones at first. I ran the blackout lamps a shade brighter on downslopes and K** led them entirely on open crests. I stacked drums contrary to spec, heavier low, wedges screwed through slats, so a skid on ice wouldn't turn a truck into a rolling bomb. I spliced fuel hose with surgical tubing when the couplers cracked, lashed it with safety wire, and prayed the clamps would hold under vibration. Men laughed until their engines stayed alive, then they stopped laughing. It built toward night like pressure behind a valve. Maps that erased bridges. Radios that answered only with snow. Officers who asked if the roads were still present, as if roads were men who could raise their hands. Somewhere ahead, engines waited cold and starving. Somewhere behind, a clerk stamped "delivered" in ink that would never smell of gasoline. That was the first contradiction, and all the others, the war as written and the war as driven. The distance between them was where I lived. Night came without a horizon. The snow erased the line where earth became sky, and then the sky fell. The first shell didn't sound like metal, it sounded like air tearing. A second later, the road behind me turned into fire. Canvas, fuel, and men rose up in a single orange breath. I ducked the blast, tires skidding, the GMC fishtailing until the ditch took us both like a trap sprung in white. The engine coughed, lurched, and stalled. For a moment there was only the hiss of falling flakes on hot steel. Then, distant, the slow percussion of artillery walking the road, counting trucks with blind knuckles. IK** led the battery, slid out, and lay flat in the drift. Shrapnel sang through the treeline, a metallic sleet that missed me because it didn't know my name. When the barrage lifted, the darkness settled back like a lid. I stood. The convoy was gone, either ahead, swallowed whole, or behind, burning. The radio gave me a breath of static, then nothing but a slow, empty hum. I tapped the casing with my knuckle as if it were a stubborn carburetor. No answer. The map in my pocket promised milestones and towns that snow had drowned. I folded it again, smaller, until it felt like a lie I could carry. I checked the drums. 10 had shifted, 2 had dented. I bled pressure from the rear tires, dug with the entrenching tool, packed snow under the drive wheels until the pit felt almost level. The cold bit so hard the shovel rang like a bell. Hands numb, breath burning, I climbed back into the cab, primed the throttle twice, and prayed to everything I believed in: compression, spark, fuel. The engine caught on the third rotation, a rough heartbeat that steadied into a low, willing grind. I rocked us out, forward, back, forward, until the ditch let go. When the wheels found the road crown again, I sat with both boots flat on the floorboards, arms loose on the wheel, waiting for the next decision to arrive. It came with a memory. A scribbled note on a depot board: Saint-Brison Bridge, armor waiting. Fuel critical. A tank battalion holding a village because someone told them the gasoline would arrive by nightfall. It was past nightfall. If they didn't get fuel, they'd be iron statues by dawn. If the bridge fell, the road west would open like a wound. The rules were clear: turn back, regroup, await orders. The math was clearer: turning back meant dying alone in miles of empty snow, or living long enough to watch someone else die because I arrived with form instead of fuel. I took the pencil from my pocket, touched Mary's letter through the wool, then laid the pencil on the dash like a compass that had chosen a single direction. Forward. I set the headlights to blackout slits, shifted to second, and let the truck move like a whisper. 15 miles an hour felt like theft. Every hollow in the road read as a crater, every stump as a sentry. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the dash, fingertips feeling the engine through the bulkhead, heat rising, mixture steady, no misfire. The gauge said half a tank. The wind said less. At the first fork, 3 unmarked paths opened like the jaws of a trap. The map offered guesses. I chose what the wind chose: left, into the trees, where the branches knitted overhead and the storm broke into sifted powder. IK** led the engine, stepped down, and listened. Far off, to the south, the slow, continuous intake of a big engine idling, Sherman, maybe 2. To the east, a deeper note, a cat's purr under snow, panther. Close. The truck smelled like a refinery. One spark and I'd be a flare for both armies. I climbed back in, eased the clutch, and crept on, counting seconds between distant G** and S. Somewhere ahead, a shape moved, low, human, uncertain. I braked. A figure flared in my blackout beams, rifle up. The muzzle wavered, then lowered. Password, he rasped. Out of fuel, I said. That made him smile, just a notch at the corner of his mouth. Engineers, he said. 128th. We lost our dump. Been warming hands over a busted generator all day. Bridge at Saint-Brison? He pointed with his chin. 2 miles. Tank sitting dry. Krauts feel us, they'll come. You alone? I looked at the mirror. Snow erased the road behind me like a bad idea. Just me. He led me by hand signals through the trees until the ditch became a cut and the cut became a road again. Firelight flickered low, shielded, careful, too small to save anyone. The engineers met me with hollow eyes and empty canteens. One of them touched the side of the truck like it might vanish if he pressed too hard. High-octane? The sergeant asked. Enough. Orders? Wrong ones. He studied my face, then the drums, then the storm. We siphon here. Fast. Then you move the rest to the bridge. He didn't wait for permission. Hoses appeared out of the dark, funnels, wrenches, the instant civilization that men make when something vital finally arrives. We fed the first Sherman by gravity, drum to hose to mouth. The engine coughed, shook, and then the big block lit, a hot, animal sound that thawed air. The tank commander rose from the hatch, goggles crusted with frost. He gave me a small salute with 2 fingers, then disappeared back into steel. That's when I heard the other sound, the one under the storm, the low, overlapping rumble of engines that were not ours, threading the woods from the east. Panthers, by the rhythm. More than one. I looked at the fuel gauge again. Less than half now, but enough to make a choice. Stay and finish the siphon, risk the whole truck when the first tracer found us, or move, draw the danger away, get the rest to the bridge while there was still a bridge to get to. The rule said conserve, coordinate, wait. The cold air tasted like copper. I made the decision that would mark me for the rest of my life. Cut the hose, I said. You've got enough to light too. I'll take the rest forward. The sergeant stared at me like I'd handed him a lit match and a house made of straw. Then he nodded once. God go with you. I climbed into the cab, felt for Mary's letter, and let the engine catch. The truck moved. The storm closed behind me. Ahead, the bridge waited, somewhere in the white, a narrow piece of wood and steel and faith, and a handful of tanks that could not move unless I broke every rule I had ever been given. I chose forward because backward wasn't a place anymore. I dropped the blackout slits 1 notch, enough to read the road as texture, ridges, the faint ribbing of tire chains that had passed in daylight. Snow hissed under the treads. The drums and back muttered like a crowded room. I kept my right palm on the dash to feel the engine through steel, listening for knocks, tasting mixture in the exhaust the way a man tastes rain in the air. Mary's letter rode my pocket like a warm coin. Machines can be fixed. People can't. She had never seen a panther headlamp shiver on the far side of pines, but her sentence weighed more than any order I'd been given. The first rule I broke was light. On open straightaways IK** led the beams entirely and drove by the white ghost of the ditch line, counting seconds between telegraph poles. In trees, I cracked the slits and used shadow to find the crown. I covered the dashboard bulbs with cigarette paper and wax so they wouldn't print my cab on snow. When the wind blew hard, I drifted with it, letting the truck wear the storm like a coat. The second rule I broke was silence. Radio dead, I talked to the machine. I told the clutch to forgive my foot. I told the throttle to remember July. I told the Carter carb to breathe slow. It isn't superstition if your life depends on its courtesy. The engine answered in small ways, a steadier idle when I eased the choke, a cleaner pull after I leaned the mix a quarter turn with gloved fingers. I smelled them before I saw them, exhaust heavy with benzene, German fuel. Panthers, idling along a parallel cut, pacing me through timber. Their engines were lower, feline, with a flutter when the governor caught. I eased off, let them pass into the dark like sharks you pretend not to notice. The bridge at Saint-Brison would be a rectangle of absence across a black river. If I arrived with a headlight, the night would swallow me in tracer. If I arrived empty, the tanks would freeze where they sat. So I made a third decision that did not belong to me. I bled speed, rolled to a hollow, and stopped. Frost creaked in the frame. Hoses snaked in the bed like sleeping serpents. I took the short length into my lap and cut 2 new feed lines with a pocketknife, splicing them with safety wire and a prayer. I would fuel on the move. Not regulation, not sane, but motion was protection, and minutes were ammunition. I eased forward until the trees thinned. A faint orange blinked ahead, shielded lanterns. The bridge. Figures lifted from the snow as I coasted in, engineers, faces pale, eyes cratered by long cold. One raised a hand. I answered with a whisper, "Keep low." He nodded, vanished, reappeared at my running board with a wrench in his teeth. Together we thumped bung caps, set the hoses, primed the siphon. Gasoline climbed the clear lines like liquid light. "Orders?" he asked. "Deliver," I said. He grinned without humor. "Breaking them, then. Stitching what's left." We moved. The first Sherman loomed on the approach, tracks white-rimed, turret black against snow. I pulled alongside until the fuel mouth met my hose. The driver's goggles shone like coins. We clipped in. Gravity and winter did the rest. The gauge on my dash inched down. The V8 in the tank coughed awake, then settled into a living growl that warmed the air around it. The commander lifted a thumb. 1. Tracer stitched the night from the tree line. Green, high, feeling for shape. The Panthers had smelled our heat. A 50 on the far Sherman barked once, saw nothing, fell silent. A round hit the river and hissed like a red-hot nail in snow. Rule 3, do not expose the truck. I swung broad across the road, angling the cab between the fire and the men on the bridge, making the GMC a wall of thin steel and bad ideas. Another Sherman nosed in, we clipped the second hose. Fuel ran like time. The Panther's engines rose, a hunting note. I felt the drums shift, mass rolling aft as we drained. When the tracer walked closer, I reached under the seat, grabbed the flare pistol, and made the fourth wrong choice of the night. I fired high into the trees behind the Panthers. The flare cracked, bloomed, and died, a false sunrise to our south. For 3 breaths the tracers veered, chasing the light. I used those breaths to wave the first tank across. Its tracks clattered onto the planks and thumped forward, each timber a rib. The second followed, fuel hose snapping free as it moved, a bright string whipped into the dark. The truck was lighter now, and that made it dangerous. Less weight meant less traction on the bridge, more bounce, more noise. I tapped the drums forward with my shoulder, shoved wedges tight, lashed 2 with rope. I could hear the Panthers clearing the timber, careful, professional, patient. "Last one," the engineer whispered. His breath fogged my sleeve. We clipped in, fastest yet. Fuel surged. Somewhere a German shouted. The third Sherman's engine caught and stayed. The commander's voice came through cupped hands, "We're moving." "Go," I said. "Take the bridge." The hose tore again. Gasoline sprayed across the truck bed and found a lantern someone hadn't led. Fire lifted from the world like it had been waiting under the snow. Flames ran the hose, kissed the staves, tasted the paint. Every instinct said jump. The 5th rule, the real rule, held me in the seat, make the truck think. I threw the transmission into first, stood on the clutch, and saw the road as a chessboard. If I blocked the near approach with fire, the Panthers would lose their flank. If I parked broadside at the bridge mouth, I could make a burning door. I drove the GMC sideways, wheels scrabbling, bed afire, and laid her across the road where the planks met earth. Heat pressed through the firewall in waves. The windshield spidered, then hazed. I set the brake, pulled the key, and climbed down into smoke so hot it felt like sand. I didn't look back. I ran to the last Sherman and slapped the armor like a friend. Through. They went. Across the burning door. Into the white. Behind me, the truck sighed, metal losing temper, wood giving up, fuel deciding. The night took a long breath. Then the world went to light. The blast picked me up and set me down 6 feet away, face in the snow. For a second there was no sound, only light, the kind that makes your teeth ache behind your eyes. Then the noise arrived late, wood snapping, drums rupturing, steel screaming as the frame sagged into fire. My truck became a furnace door kicked open on the road. Heat washed the bridge mouth. Flames climbed the timbers and spilled low, crawling along the ice like foxfire. The Panthers halted at the tree lean, black shapes with eyes, unsure if the road itself had turned to powder. Their searchlights probed, then cut out. Someone on their side knew better than to give me lines to draw on. Down! I yelled, and the engineers flattened behind the abutment. A Sherman to my right threw its turret past me and put a starshell high over the river. The world turned milk-white, brighter than day and twice as cruel. Through that glare I saw the first Panther nose out, cautious, turret left, hunting. The 50 on our lead Sherman barked, single sh*TS, feeling the range. Tracers stitched over the glassy and ricocheted into sparks. No good. Too heavy up front. The second Sherman answered with a 75 He, short-fused, bursting against the road in front of the cat. Snow and shrapnel slapped its face. It paused, unhappy. I ran bent to the engineers. Hose. We had one line unburned. I dragged it to the edge and fed the last clean drum by gravity, hand on the bung like a tourniquet. A corporal crouched with me, teeth clenched around a wrench. "That gas is hot as sin," he said. "So are we," I said, and kept the flow steady. The river wind shifted. Heat whipped sideways, rolling smoke across the road in a low, boiling sheet. Through it, German shapes multiplied, Panthers, half-tracks, infantry spreading to flank. The burning truck made a wall and a lantern both, cutting their line of sight but painting our silhouettes in orange. I needed the fire bigger and dumber. "Thermite," I said. The sergeant blinked. I pointed at the crate under his coat, bridge charges and 2 cans of compound. He understood. We popped a lid, poured a stripe across the truck's sagging frame, and touched it with a burning rag. The metal went white, brighter than the star shell, and then drooled. The frame collapsed with the sound of a piano falling downstairs. The road filled with a radiant wreck too ugly to push. "Move the 3. I waved at the third Sherman. "Angle right, use the cottage." There was a hunting cabin just off the approach, roof caved in, stone walls high enough to hide a hull. The driver pivoted, tread squealing, and put the ruin between his armor and the trees. His coke started a hard, disciplined rhythm, 3 round bursts, cutting at muzzle flashes in the pines. The first Panther took its chance, engine rising, committing to the left side of the fire. It wanted our flank. The lead Sherman let it have the line, waited for the heat shimmer to wander, then fired AP through the boil. The sound was a slammed door. The round struck low on the plate and skated, damn. The cat answered at once. Its 75 barked, the shell hitting the abutment and shaking the bridge to its bones. Chips of stone stung my cheek. "Back 2 yards. I shouted at the lead tank, palms down. He reversed, slow and sane, finding a depression I'd seen earlier, a tire rut deep enough to give him an inch of G*N depression he didn't have on the crown. He settled. The loader's silhouette moved twice, clean drills under bad weather. The G*N barked again. This time the AP lanced under the Panther's bow as it hit a hump. The round found the belly seam. The cat stopped like a clock with its mainspring cut, then burned from the inside out. The infantry behind it scattered. Some fired blind. Some didn't fire at all. The second Panther probed right, away from the worst of the heat, trying to feel a ford that wasn't there. The riverbank sheared and collapsed under its near-side track. The driver corrected, angrily professional, and held the hull with a roar. Our third Sherman took the angle and put he at the base of a pine the Germans were using for cover. The tree fell like a hunted thing and smothered 2 men beneath its crown. The rest ran sideways into the 50s bracket. "Fuel," the corporal at my elbow said. The last drum burped and went light. I yanked the hose, thumb over the mouth, swung it into the engineer's jerrycan line. "Hand to hand," I said. They passed cans like blood down a trench, sloshing amber into waiting mouths. 1 can dropped. Gas fanned across the snow and flashed to flame, a sudden blue kiss. We stamped it out with boots and curses. A half-track tried the center, hoping the burning frame had cooled enough to shove. It hadn't. Its front wheels climbed the glowing ruin and sank as if into tar. The driver netted and stayed. The machine became a siren, screaming without rescue. Panicked infantry jumped from the bed and hit the road on their knees, hands over heads to ward bullets they couldn't see. The 50 saw them anyway. Then the sound I dreaded, a long, slanting sigh from upriver, the Panthers calling friends. The fight would thicken until it crushed us, unless the field itself decided in our favor. I looked at what we had left, 1 burning gate, 3 living tanks, a handful of men, and the simple fact of cold. Flood it, I said. We knocked the bridge planks loose at the near edge with bars and a sledge, dishing the surface into a shallow trough. Snowmelt and river spray ran down it and hit the fire. Steam rolled, thick as wool. Smoke, steam, starshell glare, and wind turned the approach into a blind tunnel that belonged to no one. Inside that tunnel, our engines idled low and patient. Outside it, theirs revved and faltered. The second Panther edged closer, turret swinging, afraid to waste a sh*T on smoke. The lead Sherman fired long, not at the tank but at the snowbank beside it. The blast rolled a white wave across the cat's tracks. Ice seized, mud glazed. The Panther tried to back out and fishtailed, broadside to us for a breath too long. The G*Ner took it. AP in at the angle where flat becomes curve. The armor shrugged once, then failed. The turret stopped mid-word. Silence never comes in battle, but there is a second when both sides think the other knows something they don't. This was that second. The Germans read our wall of fire as intention, not accident. The wrecked half-track looked like bait. The starshells and falling trees and disciplined bursts wrote a story larger than our hands. They saw an ambush where there were only cold men making heat behave. The third Panther backed away, cautious. A whistle blew, 2 long, 1 short, their code to fold a probe without shame. The infantry melted into the pines. The engines dwindled, then turned to a distant rumor. We did not chase. We couldn't. We held. When the last echo died, the engineers sagged against the abutment and turned quiet in the same breath, the way men do who suspect they're still visible to someone's scope. The sergeant handed me a canteen. It tasted like tin and snow. You just blocked a river with a truck, he said. No, I said. I taught it to stand. On the bridge, the Shermans idled like lions with full bellies. Their commanders watched the tree lean without speaking. The fire eased to a skeletal glow. The road was gone, replaced by a black, smoking shape under stars we couldn't see. We had not advanced an inch. But the village behind us still had houses. The men inside those houses still had names. And the line, the thin, ragged thread that kept the winter from swallowing us, held. Dawn arrived the way guilt does, slow, gray, and without apology. The fire had eaten itself down to iron bones. The bridge breathed steam where snow met embers. The road on the far bank was a smear of tracks and decisions that could not be recalled. I walked the length of what used to be my truck. The frame had slumped into a welded sigh, the cab was a blackened angle. The GMC badge lay crooked in the ash, still readable, stubborn as a dog tag. I pried it free with a bayonet and let it cool in the snow until it stopped stinging my glove. Behind me, the Shermans idled low, then one by one eased their throttles back to a steady lope, alive, not advancing, simply breathing because I had fed them. Engineers kicked through wreckage with boot toes, turning over things that had been useful last night and were now shapes. No one spoke louder than the river. An officer in an overcoat appeared as if made from fog. Captain's bars. He had the look of a man who had slept sitting up. He offered me a canteen without asking a question. The water tasted like canvas and salvation. You broke 3 direct orders, he said finally. You moved alone in blackout. You diverted fuel without authorization. You used a vehicle to block a bridge. He took the canteen back, capped it. You also kept a road that had no business living. I did what the map couldn't, I said. He nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition between men who had both watched paperwork burn. 2 companies in Saint-Brison are still on the line because of this mistake you did not make. He pulled a grease pencil from his pocket and wrote something small on his notebook. I'll need your name for the report. Hayes, I said. Walter. Quartermaster Corps. He wrote that, closed the book like a wound, and tucked it away. There won't be room for names, he said. But there will be a line. He looked past me at the bridge. Fuel delivered. Position held. He left me with that sentence and the sound of engines warming the day. The engineers gathered their tools as if they belonged to someone who might come back. One of them, thin, fox-eyed, touched the edge of the burned frame and then his helmet, a quick, private acknowledgement men make to machines that do what men ask at the price men cannot pay. Wrong turn, he muttered, not unkindly. Right place. It stuck. The name worked its way through the ranks faster than orders ever do. I heard it twice before noon, once from a tanker handing me a cup of coffee that tasted like wood smoke, once from a runner who'd come up the road with a message and a grin he couldn't help. They're asking if the wrong-turn driver is still breathing, he said. I said probably. I did inventory because that's what I knew to do when I had nothing else. I counted drums that no longer existed, hoses that had become vines of carbon, wrenches with their edges rounded by fire. I found the entrenching tool, warped like a question mark. I found my pencil fused into the dash, a black vein. Mary's letter was gone. I stood where the cab had been and recited it from memory until the word steadied me. Machines can be fixed. People can't. She had been right about everything except that morning. By noon, the village woke like a patient after fever, doors opening, smoke rising thin from chimneys that had been dark the night before. A boy with a red scarf saluted our tanks with the solemnity of a priest. An old woman crossed herself at the sight of the burned truck and then at me, as if to cover both chances. Paper arrived in the afternoon, as it always does. A corporal from S3 brought a typed sheet, the ink smudged by cold fingers. He read aloud so there would be no misunderstandings. Enemy armor probed east approach. Bridge denied by obstruction. Friendly tanks fueled in situ and held line. Casualties light. Fuel delivered. Position held. He tapped the period with the tip of his glove. That's the whole war right there, he said. 4 dots that leave out everything. What about the driver? One of the engineers asked. The corporal shrugged. Reports tight. We're saving ink for spring. I cleaned what could be cleaned. I hammered the badge flat on a rock and slid it into my pocket. The captain told me a replacement truck would be assigned, as available, which we both knew meant when the weather and Europe agreed to be reasonable. Until then, I was attached to the engineers, a driver without a steering wheel. That night, after stand-to, I sat on the abutment and watched the river take heat from the day. The tanks ticked as they cooled. Somewhere beyond the trees, the enemy thought about us and decided, for 1 more hour, not to try the door again. A private sat beside me and lit a cigarette with hands that were almost steady. He looked at the black shape in the road. That yours? It used to be, I said. He nodded like that was the right answer. They'll forget this, he said, not bitter, only practical. Good, I said. Forgetting keeps men alive. Remembering keeps them honest. He didn't understand, and that was fine. I understood enough for both of us. When I finally slept, it was in the back of a maintenance truck that smelled of grease and old bread. I dreamed about tires finding purchase on ice, about engines choosing to start, about a flare rising over a forest and telling a lie that saved the truth. In the morning there would be another road, another set of orders, another map that believed in bridges. I would drive again because there was nothing else I knew how to do. If they gave me rules, I would carry them until the moment came to set them down. And if a road split 3 ways with no signs and the wind spoke in the trees, I knew which voice I would trust. After the war, I went home. Not to victory parades or brass bands, just a gray morning in Toledo, spring of '46, and the smell of wet asphalt that hadn't changed since I left. The depot dropped me at the bus stop with a duffel and a discharge paper folded like a used map. Nobody was there to meet me. Mary had written she'd wait at the shop, and I wanted it that way. I had driven too many miles with ghosts in the passenger seat to share the ride with anyone living. The garage stood where it always had, a little more rust in the roof, a little more silence between the rafters. The hand-painted signs still read "Keep It Running Garage." The words felt heavier now, less instruction, more plea. Inside, the air smelled of dust and oil, 2 things that never surrender. Mary stood at the workbench, hair tied up, hands black with grease, fixing a carburetor off a farmer's tractor. She looked up and said, "You're late." Then she smiled, and I learned you can come home in 1 heartbeat. We rebuilt the place piece by piece. Customers came back slow. War makes people careful with machines and quicker to fix them themselves. Some just wanted to see what a man who'd driven through Europe's graveyards looked like. I didn't tell them much. I kept the stories under the hood, where they belonged. But I did hang one thing on the wall, nothing shiny, nothing framed, just a scorched GMC badge, the one I'd pried from the wreck. It sat above the workbench between the wrench racks, warped and black around the edges. People would glance at it and then at me. "Was that yours?" they'd ask. "It used to be," I'd say, same every time. That answer worked. It told the truth without letting it out. I never registered for the Veterans Club. Never wore the medals they mailed in a paper envelope, 3 of them, all wrong. The citation said meritorious transport under fire. It didn't say wrong road, right result. I kept them in a drawer under spark plugs. The real trophy was the sound of an engine catching clean on a cold morning. Mary kept the books. She added a second line to the shop ledger, "For soldiers, no charge if it's the starter." She said they'd earned at least that much. I fixed Chevrolets, Dodges, one Harley that came in every spring with a missing kick pedal. Sometimes young mechanics from the new plant would stop by to ask about carburetor balancing or why their timing marks danced. I'd show them, patient, the same way war had taught me, by feel first, numbers later. Winter of '49, a man from the Army's logistics office came through on his way to Detroit. He recognized my name from somewhere. We had coffee while the snow fell lazy outside. "You're in the archives," he said. "No," I said. "Yes," he smiled. "Not by name. There's a line on an old map of the Saint-Brison sector. A pencil note. Says Hayes Corner, place where the convoy didn't stop. You know anything about that?" I told him maybe it was just a joke someone left on a bad day. He didn't argue. When he left, he shook my hand like he was closing a file. Years passed that way, steady work, small winters, machines that behaved if you spoke kindly. The boys who came back from Korea stopped in sometimes, asking what France had been like. I told them the truth that fits inside a shop, cold, noisy, and full of things that didn't want to start. They always laughed, not knowing that's all any war is. At night, when the streetlights went out one by one down the block, I'd lock up, sweep the floor, and touch the badge on the wall. It was smooth now from years of wiping away dust. I never polished it. Fire shouldn't shine. It should remind. Mary said once, "You never talk about that night." I told her, because it's still running. She didn't ask what I meant. She'd lived long enough beside engines to know some only stop when you do. In the early 60s, a reporter from a veterans magazine wrote asking for an interview. He'd found mention of a driver haze in an after-action report and wanted to confirm details. I wrote back one sentence: "The report is enough." He printed that as the closing line of his article and called it poetry. It wasn't. It was just how mechanics tell the truth, short, exact, without garnish. Every so often, a customer would pause under the badge and squint. "What happened to the truck?" they'd ask. I'd say, "It finished its run." If they pressed, I'd hand them the wrench and tell them to listen to their own engine first. There are better stories there, ones that end without smoke. By 1970, the town had paved the road past the garage and built a grocery across the street. Kids on bicycles used my side wall for shade. I liked that, the hum of chains, the click of freewheels, sound of things that still move because someone keeps them greased. I thought maybe that's what all of us drivers were doing, in the end, keeping the world turning one quiet bearing at a time. On my last working day, I closed the bay door halfway and wrote a new line on the sign in faded paint: "Keep it running, always forward." I wasn't thinking of business. I was thinking of a bridge in France, a wrong turn, and a road that never stopped asking for courage. If you drive east out of Toledo now, the road dips past a small repair shop with a rusted badge nailed to the door. The letters are nearly gone. But if the sun hits right, you can still read them: GMC. Underneath, someone, maybe Mary, maybe one of the kids, carved words too shallow to see at night: "Fuel delivered." That's the only record I ever wanted. Everything else is already running where it belongs, in engines, in stories, in the quiet between gears when a man listens and knows he's home. He broke orders. He lost his truck. And he saved the front. They'll never teach it at West Point, how a single wrong turn in a storm can hold a line when strategy collapses. They'll talk about fuel ratios, supply chains, tonnage. They won't mention a man alone in a truck, steering by instinct and faith in steel. Sometimes victory doesn't come from plans. It comes from one engine that refuses to die, one driver who trusts the road even when the road disappears. I still hear it sometimes, the hum under my ribs, the sound of the GMC idling in the snow, waiting for a decision that would outlive both of us. People say war makes heroes. It doesn't. It makes mechanics, patching what's left so others can move. That night in France, I wasn't brave. I was just moving forward because stopping felt wrong. And that's how Europe was saved, by motion.